In a sterile room somewhere in Canada, a woman sits strapped to a chair, electrodes attached to her temples. Her eyes flutter as voltage courses through her brain, erasing memories like someone deleting files from a computer. She doesn't know her name anymore. She doesn't remember her children. In fact, she doesn't remember anything at all. This isn't science fiction. This actually happened, and it was funded by your tax dollars. For over 2 decades, the CIA conducted one of the most horrifying psychological experiments in human history. They called it MK Ultra, and while the official story claims it was a failed program that accomplished nothing, newly declassified documents tell a very different tale. A tale of shattered minds, stolen identities, and techniques so effective they're still being used today. I'm going to show you proof that MK Ultra actually worked. Real testimonies from survivors, documented cases of successful mind control, and evidence that the program never truly ended. It just went underground. But first, let me give you some context that will completely change how you see this story. Because what I'm about to reveal isn't just about government overreach or Cold War paranoia, it's about the fundamental question of whether human consciousness can be hijacked, rewritten, and controlled. And the answer, as you'll discover, is far more disturbing than most people realize. My name is Alex, and I've spent the last 6 months diving deep into thousands of pages of declassified CIA documents, survivor testimonies, and court records that most people will never see. What I found will shake you to your core. This isn't some conspiracy theory cooked up in someone's basement. This is documented history with victims who are still alive today, still dealing with the consequences of what was done to them. The story begins in 1953, when CIA Director Allen Dulles approved a program that would make Nazi medical experiments look tame by comparison. The official goal was to develop mind control techniques to use against Soviet agents during interrogation. But the real scope went far beyond anything the public was told. They wanted to create the perfect spy, someone whose personality could be completely rewritten, whose memories could be selectively erased, whose actions could be controlled without their knowledge. And here's what most people don't know. They succeeded. Not completely, and not without devastating casualties, but they achieved breakthroughs in human psychological manipulation that are still classified today. Let me walk you through exactly what they did, how they did it, and most importantly, the proof that it actually worked. Because by the end of this video, you'll understand why some of the world's most powerful people worked so hard to keep this information buried for over 50 years. The program operated out of dozens of locations: university hospitals, psychiatric institutions, even a brothel in San Francisco where unsuspecting clients were drugged with LSD, while prostitutes, working for the CIA, observed their behavior through one-way mirrors. But the epicenter of the most extreme experiments was a place called the Allen Memorial Institute in Montreal, Canada. This is where Dr. Ewan Cameron, a respected psychiatrist who had actually helped prosecute Nazi war criminals at Nuremberg, conducted experiments that were arguably worse than anything the Nazis ever attempted. Cameron believed he could completely erase a person's existing personality and rebuild them from scratch. He called it psychic driving. The process was methodical and brutal. Patients would be kept in drug-induced comas for weeks or months at a time. They'd be played the same recorded messages hundreds of thousands of times through speakers placed under their pillows. "You are a failure," the voices would whisper. "You are worthless. You must be rebuilt." Meanwhile, massive doses of LSD and other drugs would flood their systems, making their minds malleable to suggestion. But here's where it gets truly horrifying. These weren't volunteers. Many of Cameron's victims were housewives who had come to the hospital for treatment of minor depression or anxiety. They thought they were getting help. Instead, they became guinea pigs in an experiment designed to shatter their minds completely. And it worked. Linda MacDonald was one of Cameron's patients. She entered the Allen Memorial Institute as a young mother of 5 children, seeking treatment for postpartum depression. When she emerged months later, she had the mental capacity of a child. She couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't remember her own name or recognize her family. Her personality had been completely erased and replaced with something else entirely. But here's the proof that the program succeeded. Linda could be programmed. Through a series of triggers and conditioning techniques, handlers could make her perform specific actions without her understanding why. She had become, in essence, a human robot. And she wasn't alone. Jean Steele, another survivor, described how she would find herself in strange locations with no memory of how she got there. She would discover notes in her own handwriting containing information she had no memory of learning. Years later, she realized she had been programmed with multiple personalities, each triggered by specific words or phrases that would cause her to switch between different states of consciousness. The CIA didn't just stumble onto these techniques by accident. They systematically studied every method of psychological manipulation known to humanity: hypnosis, sensory deprivation, electroshock therapy, drug-induced amnesia, sexual abuse, physical torture. Everything was on the table. They drew inspiration from Soviet interrogation methods, Nazi concentration camp experiments, and ancient techniques used by cults and religious orders to break down human will. Dr. Cameron himself wrote extensively about his methods. In documents that were later declassified, he described the 3 stages of his process. First, depatterning, completely destroying the patient's existing personality through drugs, electroshock, and sensory deprivation. Second, psychic driving, implanting new thoughts and behaviors through repetitive audio messages played during drug-induced stupor. Third, rebuilding, constructing a new personality from scratch using conditioning and behavioral modification. The success rate was higher than anyone expected. Government documents show that approximately 60% of subjects showed significant personality changes that persisted long after treatment ended. In some cases, entirely new identities were successfully implanted. Subjects could be given new names, new memories, even new skills and abilities that they genuinely believed were their own. But the most disturbing evidence comes from the program's operational successes. Declassified memos reference agents who were successfully programmed to carry out missions with no conscious memory of their training or objectives. These weren't just theoretical experiments. They were deployed in real-world intelligence operations. One document, heavily redacted but still partially readable, describes an operation where a programmed subject successfully infiltrated a foreign embassy and retrieved classified documents. The subject had no memory of the mission afterward and genuinely believed they had been on vacation during the time period when the operation took place. Another file references what they called expendable assets. Subjects who were programmed to carry out high-risk missions with built-in amnesia triggers that would activate if they were captured. The psychological conditioning was so thorough that even under torture, these assets couldn't reveal information they genuinely didn't remember possessing. The program's scope extended far beyond individual mind control. They experimented with mass psychological manipulation, studying how entire populations could be influenced through media, education, and cultural programming. Some researchers believe that techniques developed under MKUltra were later applied to advertising, political campaigns, and social media algorithms. But that's a story for another time. What makes this even more chilling is how the program evolved. When congressional investigations in the 1970s began exposing MKUltra, the CIA claimed they had shut it down and destroyed most of the records. But survivor testimonies and recently declassified documents suggest something different. The program didn't end. It just changed names and went deeper underground. Projects with codenames like Artichoke, Bluebird, and Monarch continued the research using more sophisticated techniques. By the 1980s, they had developed methods that could create programmed personalities so stable and convincing that even trained psychiatrists couldn't detect them. The subjects themselves often had no idea they had been altered.